Hi. At the time of this recording, we're in the third week of the first month of winter. The first month of winter we associate with the ascending increase of day length for 6 months. So from the solstice in the northern hemisphere, the winter solstice, to the summer solstice 6 months later, we're passing through ascending, increasing day length until the longest light of the year happens in the time period just before the summer solstice. I'm having an interesting experience with this because I'm practicing something a little different than I normally have. I'm practicing experiencing all 6 of these months, which correspond to 6 grandfathers. I'm practicing them all in sequence and all simultaneously. What do I mean by that? I'm saying that the father's family has 3 grandfathers. So on the masculine side of my family, there are 3 grandfathers. Father's father, what's called number 2 boy, the fire function. Father's father's father, the great grandfather, which is the grandfather of the heart, joy, laughter, teamwork. And then father's mother's father, which happens to be the top of the head, pituitary, power, thunder, 3 forms of masculinity on my father's side of the family. On my mother's side of the family, 3 more. These correspond to what's called the yin grandfathers: mother's father, mother's mother's father, and mother's father's father. Mother's father is called number 1. Mother's mother's father is called number 3. Mother's father's father, number 5. Now, I know there's just numbers and all of that stuff, and each one of these, we correspond to fluid dynamics of feelings. So, for example, the 2 boy one happens to be fire in the belly, action, mobility, and in the physical body, it corresponds to blood. Mother's father corresponds to air, breath. It also corresponds to softer feelings, which have to do with some degrees of childhood feelings. It has an innocent quality to it. It has a softer, humble quality to it. And the element in the mother's father's location happens to be the air or the breath physically, and it corresponds to the capacity to be able to increase life through breath and or inspiration. And it is very much a starting point of the increase of light for 6 months. Now, the intriguing part about mother's father is it has all these different attributes around the lung function and breath, but it has a series of other attributes which are, well, almost a bit challenging for me. Now, I personally have spent, a lot of time, I would say years at different times, 2 different time periods. I took a 1.5 years to only focus on mother's father. Another time period, another 1.5 years to 2 years, a decade later, trying it again. Now, my reason for going there is I really considered to be that the time period of the winter solstice, which is a long-term increase of light and air and breath of the upper masculine consciousness, was the entry point to be able to increase life, breath dynamics, or feeling, or higher consciousness into my being, in my body for health, and in my mind for clarity, and in my feelings for higher consciousness. Yeah, that's right. I spent more or less 30 years going from that perspective, only until decades later to discover that his wife, mother's mother, is actually the entry point that has a lot to do with how my mother's father is capable of being able to demonstrate my access to breathing. I'll pause for a moment. I know that's a lot to consider. What I'm saying is your mother's relationship to her father has a deep impact on how well you use your breath. Her mother, your mother's mother, is another part of that triangle. Your mother, your mother's mother, and your mother's father. This triangular dynamics controls the inner ability for me to feel and open. Feel mother's mother. That's a whole lot. Now we're primarily focused on to increase the capacity to feel. I need to open up my breath, lung, meridian function, my humility, and that's related to my mother's father. I know this is not easy. It's not easy for me, and I'm in the middle of it. I recognize that this is not easy to comprehend. I mean, how can your mother's father so dramatically affect your metabolic function through breathing, and his feelings for his own parents, his feelings for his daughter, my mother, is aligned with and controls in some form or another my own ability to be able to voluntarily move my feelings, inspiration, breath, imagination. Wow. So for me, this month of the ascending day length, the very first consummate month, is important to the journey in order for it to continue. Now, for those of you who are following along, I'm suggesting that the place that we start is primarily with, the two-girl season, the first month of autumn. So we've already gone through 3 months of autumn, and we're in the 4th month of the continuation, where we spent 3 months going through the 3 grandmothers on the mother's side. And as much as possible, acknowledging and appreciating the function of those 3 grandmothers who actually circulate the experience of change and feeling and open up the veil to receive divine inspiration. 3 grandmothers, huge responsibility. If you haven't already done it, at least consider it. Your relationship to your mother's mother, you may or may not have known, or your great-grandmother, or your great-grandmother, what we call number 6, which is your mother's father's mother. Those 3 grandmothers are very strongly linked together. They operate as a unit. Now we come into the 4th month, the first month of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're talking about now the billows, if I may use that metaphor, of the billows of the lungs, breathing, which is not just the respiratory function of air. It is capable of being infused with life force by purpose and intention. So your ability to be able to increase your capacity for light, air, breath, life force, many other attributes have to do with your mother's, father's feelings. Genetically, you got them through your mother. And maybe you were even still around, or your grandfather was still around when you were born, and maybe you got them more directly by the influence of your grandfather, but you also got his relationship to both of his parents. Your mother's father's parents, they're very deeply connected to you. Your mother's father's father, we call the throat position, and it has to do with your free will, your transparency, your own telepathic abilities, or your creativity and your ability to be a Michelangelo. Your ability to be artistically creative is related to your mother's father's father. Wow. He's married, obviously, to your mother's father's mother. I know that's a lot of mothers and fathers, but their combined emotional composition is what you have to feel, unravel, transform, replace, embody, clean off who's not supposed to be there, be thankful for the ones that are helping you. So this is a profound thing. So this week for me, I'm really, really working on this relationship I have with my mother's father again, but I'm taking in the infusion of his wife, my mother's mother, and increasing this experience about the two of them actually liking each other. Even though they were married, my mother's mother died when my mother was very young. My mother's father went off to war and other places. And it was not an easy composition for the two of them. My responsibility, and I'm implying that it's also your opportunity, is to occupy these places and open them up with a sincere desire to want to grow. So part of that for me is what I'm experimenting with is combining all three grandmothers from my mother's side, all three grandfathers from my mother's side, combining all six of them, feeling them, using the composite total to affect my lungs and breath and feeling, and then I'm adding in three more because we're in the season at the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. We go into fire, fire, fire. What that means is fire in the belly comes right at the equinox. That's on the father's side. That's fire in the blood, fire in life, fire in action, hormones. Then comes fire in the heart, which is father's father's father. And then the last one at the very peak of the day length, right before the summer solstice, is the highest light of the year. So for 6 months, I'm passing through masculine composition. Now, I'm sorry, but if you're a woman, which many of you are, you're passing through a composite sequentially of how women feel about men, and then how men feel about women. You're passing through 6 months of dealing with men. 3 from your mother's side if you're in the northern hemisphere, 3 from your father's side. And by the way, I'm not very good at my own masculine side, so it's bringing up a turbulence for me to unify the 6 grandfathers in my family tree, which, by the way, happens to correspond to the energy running from the tips of the toes, running up to the interior function, and running up the front of the body. So there's a whole series of energy rising up the front of the body. At the summer solstice, it starts to go down. Summer solstice, if you're in the northern hemisphere, the summer solstice is now the decline, and that goes through 6 months of the female. So I'm doing 6 months of masculine, later 6 months of feminine. I'm just reporting back to you that this is a profoundly useful experience for me. I'm experiencing things by combining the males on my family tree. I'm experiencing surges of different forms of optimism, which I'm not known characteristically to be a wildly optimistic type. I'm slightly more on the cynical edge of things, but I'm experiencing surges of energy rising up, and I'm using it to, as best I can, to vitalize and increase, or if you will, fuse the energy of my masculine eventually with my feminine. And this is just to report on where I am, to let you know, week to week or month to month, how this journey is occurring for me. This is an experiment. I've not ever combined the 6 grandfathers of my family tree simultaneously and trying to meet them in the middle where this ball of light is. The 3 from my father's side, the 3 from my mother's side, meeting together, having a vital function in my own heart. I'll let you know tomorrow or next week how it's going, but for now I'm experimenting with that. I hope you got something out of that. Talk to you again.